guys, want to do a quick video on a camshaft tool and show how it works with the installation and removal of camshaft bearings. So there are several different variations of this tool. They're kind of pricey typically. This one I believe I paid maybe a couple $100 for several years back. I've used this tool a handful of times, and so far it's paid for itself. Seeing that the machine shop typically wants 40, 50, 60 bucks depending on where you go sometimes to remove camshaft bearings. So with this tool you can do it yourself. So let's take a look at this thing and see exactly what the parts are and how it works. Alright, so these are the main components of the tool. The long shaft that all the dies get driven in on, a conical bearing, or a conical support rather, that centers the shaft in the cam bearings, and then there are 5 dies, and these 5 dies are incrementally stepped, largest to smallest. In a small block Ford, the front cam bearing is largest, and then as they go back in the block, there are 5 total, they get incrementally smaller, and it's about 10 thousandths of a difference between each die. And the manufacturer did that so you could obviously get in there with some kind of a tool or a driver or something to install the cam bearings. It'd be really hard to do it if they were all the same size, so making them stepped makes accessing them quite a bit easier. So the way this works is with the driver, you will install the conical support bearing, and that kind of stabilizes it. And then your first bearing will be done with this die. You will insert it into the bearing and apply force to this with a hammer, and it will drive the bearing out of the block. And then once that one is done, you will remove the old bearing, move on to the next die and the next bearing, repeat the process all the way until all the bearings are removed from the block. And installation is a little bit trickier. It's a little bit more of a finesse operation, but it's basically just the reverse of pulling them out. With exception, you have to be mindful of lining up oil holes and things of that nature. So yeah, first thing we're going to do though is not use it to move any bearings. Rather, we're going to use it to remove the plug in the back of the engine. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so we've got the shaft inserted into the cam journals and the conical support, and the driver tool is resting up against the back plug in the engine. I'll zoom in tight on that so you can see what happens when we apply force to it here. Okay, the rear engine plug is removed. Now we're going to move on to pressing the cam bearings out front to rear in the engine. So the first one, I'm going to use the first die. It's marked C1. You might not be able to see that, but C1, and we're going to install it into the cam bearing and push it out. I do like to lubricate these a little bit, and yeah, I know the bearing that's coming out of there is no good anymore. It's going to be not usable. You obviously don't want to reuse any of these bearings, but I like to lubricate it for protection of my tool, actually. So lubricate it, and it fits right in there. It's a nice tight fit, usually within a couple thousandths. So now with the first one, it's kind of tricky because there's no support to really hold the tool. So you can, just with the face of the hammer, slowly push this one out. And try not to hit the block. As I'm repeatedly doing. So I'm just going to put the tool in here and kind of use that. Since the bearing's already pushed out somewhat, it should be okay. And there's the bearing. Just remove the tool here. And what we're left with, I can pull it out, is the bearing on the die. And now we'll just repeat it for the subsequent bearings. Move on to die number 2.